Wildbore is Director of Care Rights UK. Thanks for coming on, Helen. Am I being too harsh, or do you share similar outrage and surprise by these findings?
Well, I'm afraid we're not surprised by the findings of the interim report. The Secretary of State has actually just confirmed what families sadly have been saying for years, that the CQC isn't fit for purpose. As a charity, we've been warning them and calling on them to take action, letting them know the impact that their lack of action was having on the lives and the dignity of people living in care services. And we very much welcome the very swift action that's been taken by this new government, who have not long been in power.
And that action is going to involve what? Sorry, Helen, as you understand.
So in terms of bringing forward this review, bringing forward the interim report, shining a spotlight on it, as far as I understand it, that review is at its early stages. We haven't actually spoken to the person conducting that review yet to give our side of the story. So I fear things may actually get worse.
Well, what is your side of the story? Tell us what your side of the story is.
Yeah, so we support people who rely on care services, so predominantly older people living in care homes. And the people we support have been absolutely desperate to have the regulator for England, which is CQC, do their job. And I'm afraid the failings go back years, but what happened during the pandemic, when the CQC kind of took a step back from regular inspections, it left people in those settings completely abandoned by their regulator at a time when they needed them the most, with families being told they had to stay away, a complete lack of oversight of what was happening in those settings. And I'm afraid there was a lot of trust lost at that point. And CQC, as a regulator, they ask families and people using services to come forward and tell them about their experiences of using those services, and to tell them about good and bad experiences of care. But then when they get those experiences reported by families, they sort of bat them away, and they don't act. And we run an advice line, and we're supporting people in the most vulnerable of situations who are experiencing poor care, and they have been banging on the door of CQC trying to get them to act. And
that's saying what, Helen? What kind of examples of the type of poor care are they describing to the CQC?
So if it's a really serious example, a really serious incident, there are other places to go. There is the safeguarding teams at local authorities when people are at risk of really serious abuse and neglect. But other experiences of, for example, falls in care homes, if it's not serious enough there's quite a high threshold that's needed for a safeguarding team to investigate. If it's not quite serious enough to be, someone at risk of abuse or neglect, that is when the CQC needs to act, to act on those reports of poor care, to go in and actually see what's happening in that care setting. And, it takes a lot of courage for people to speak up about poor care, either themselves or through a family member, because they fear that things will get worse, and they fear repercussions. So we've had people who have been banned from visiting after raising concerns about care, or even people who've been evicted from the setting. And so when you raise your head above the parapet and you go to the regulator and you say, this has happened to me, it takes a lot of courage. And then if you're battered away, you get the sort of stop response from the regulator that they don't deal with individual complaints and they don't take action, you're not going to go back to that regulator. So there's a lot of trust that's been lost. And I think also the CQC have actually forgotten who they're there to represent. They've almost become a spokesperson for care providers.
Right.
And they're actually there to make sure that people using care and health services across England are getting minimum standards of good care.
I wonder what they would say in response to all of this, which presumably might be along the lines of, this has all got very big, we're very under-resourced, we don't have the money, we'd like to do the best we possibly can, we've been trying our hardest, but. Is there any truth in that?
I mean, they're under enormous pressure and they've had budgets cut. There's no getting around that. But it's the way that they present themselves, and they have allowed a culture to develop within their own organisation where people like me and people who are relying on the regulator to do their job perceive them as not acting on behalf of the people that they're there to represent. So even in the apology that was issued, you mentioned it earlier, even in the apology that was issued last week from the new interim chief exec, that apology was sent to and was aimed at care providers. And we just thought, well, where is the apology? There was very little mention of people using services. Where is the apology for them? The failings of the CQC are impacting daily on their lives. They're putting their lives and their dignity at risk. Why haven't they been apologised to by the CQC for those failings? Why is that going to the providers?
Very good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on. Helen Wildbore, Director of Care Rights UK. And also, to add to Helen's questions, where's the accountability here? If